Chapter 5 of Evan de Vide by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 5. And now let us trace out the whole history of the bill and the account of expenses in the business world of Paris. The law enacts that the third holder, the technical expression for the third party into whose hands the bill passes, is at liberty to proceed for the whole amount against any one of the various endorsers who appears to him to be most likely to make prompt payment. Monsieur Métivier, using this discretion, served a summons upon Lucien. Behold the successive stages of the proceedings, all of them perfectly futile. Métivier, with the Cointets behind him, knew that Lucien was not in a position to pay, but insolvency in fact is not insolvency in law until it has been formally proved. Formal proof of Lucien's inability to pay was obtained in the following manner. On the 5th of May, Métivier's process server gave Lucien notice of the protest and an account of the expense thereof, and summoned him to appear before the Tribunal of Commerce, or County Court, of Paris, to hear a vast number of things. This, among others, that he was liable to imprisonment as a merchant. By the time that Lucien, hard pressed and hunted down on all sides, read this jargon, he received notice of judgment against him by default. Coralie, his mistress, ignorant of the whole matter, imagined that Lucien had obliged his brother-in-law, and handed him all the documents together. Too late. An actress sees so much of bailiffs, duns, and writs upon the stage that she looks on all stamped paper as a farce. Tears filled Lucien's eyes. He was unhappy on Séchard's account, he was ashamed of the forgery, he wished to pay, he desired to gain time. Naturally, he took counsel of his friends. But by the time Lousteau, Blondet, Bixiou, and Nathan had told the poet to snap his fingers at a court only established for tradesmen, Lucien was already in the clutches of the law. He beheld upon his door the little yellow placard which leaves its reflection on the porter's countenance, and exercises a most astringent influence upon credit, striking terror into the heart of the smallest tradesman, and freezing the blood in the veins of a poet susceptible enough to care about the bits of wood, silken rags, dyed woolen stuffs, and multifarious gimcracks entitled furniture. When the broker's men came for Coralie's furniture, the author of the Marguerite fled to a friend of Bixiou's, one Desroches, a barrister, who burst out laughing at the sight of Lucien in such a state about nothing at all. "That is nothing, my dear fellow. Do you want to gain time?" "Yes, as much possible." "Very well, apply for stay of execution. Go and look up Masson, he is a solicitor in the Commercial Court and a friend of mine. Take your documents to him. He will make a second application for you, and give notice of objection to the jurisdiction of the court. There is not the least difficulty. You are a journalist, your name is well known enough. If they summons you before a civil court, come to me about it. That will be my affair. I engage to send anybody who offers to annoy the fair Coralie about his business." On the 28th of May, Lucien's case came on in the civil court, and judgment was given before Desroches expected it. Lucien's creditor was pushing on the proceedings against him. A second execution was put in, and again Coralie's pilasters were gilded with placards. Desroches felt rather foolish; a colleague had caught him napping, to use his own expression. He demurred, not without reason, that the furniture belonged to Mademoiselle Coralie, with whom Lucien was living, and demanded an order for inquiry. Thereupon the judge referred the matter to the registrar for inquiry, the furniture was proved to belong to the actress, and judgment was entered accordingly. Métivier appealed, and judgment was confirmed on appeal on the 30th of June. On the 7th of August, Maitre Cachan received by the coach a bulky package endorsed Métivier versus Séchard and Lucien Chardon. The first document was a neat little bill, of which a copy, accuracy guaranteed, is here given for the reader's benefit. To bill due the last day of April, drawn by Séchard Junior, to order of Lucien de Rubempré, together with expenses of protest and return, 1,037 francs 45 centimes. May 5th, serving notice of protest and summons to appear before the Tribunal of Commerce in Paris, May 7th, 8 francs 75 centimes. May 7th, judgment by default and warrant of arrest, 35 francs. May 10th, notification of judgment, 8 francs 50 centimes. May 12th, warrant of execution, 5 francs 50 centimes. May 14th, inventory and appraisement previous to execution, 16 francs. May 18th, expenses of affixing placards, 15 francs 25 centimes. May 19th, registration, 4 francs. May 24th, verification of inventory and application for stay of execution on the part of the said Lucien de Rubempré, objecting to the jurisdiction of the court, 12 francs. May 27th, order of the court upon application duly repeated and transfer of case to the civil court, 35 francs. May 28th, notice of summary proceedings in the civil court at the instance of Métivier, represented by counsel, 6 francs 50 centimes. June 2nd, judgment after hearing both parties condemning Lucien for expenses of protest and return, the plaintiff to bear costs of proceedings in the commercial court, 150 francs. June 6th, notification of judgment, 10 francs. June 15th, warrant of execution, 5 francs 50 centimes. June 19th, inventory and appraisement preparatory to execution, interpleader summons by the demoiselle Coralie, claiming goods and chattels taken in execution, demand for immediate special inquiry before further proceedings be taken, 20 francs. June 19th, judge's order referring matter to registrar for immediate special inquiry, 40 francs. June 19th, judgment in favor of the said Mademoiselle Coralie, 250 francs. June 20th, appeal by Métivier, 17 francs. June 30th, confirmation of judgment, 250 francs. Total, 1,926 francs, 45 centimes. Bill matured May 31st with expenses of protest and return, 1,037 francs 45 centimes. Serving notice of protest, 8 francs 75 centimes. Total, 1,046 francs 20 centimes. Bill matured June 30th with expenses of protest and return, 1,037 francs 45 centimes. Serving notice of protest, 8 francs 75 centimes. Total, 1,046 francs 20 centimes. This document was accompanied by a letter from Métivier instructing Maître Cachan, notary of Angouleme, to prosecute David Séchard with the utmost rigor of the law. Wherefore Maître Victor Ange Herménégilde Doublon summoned David Séchard before the Tribunal of Commerce in Angouleme for the sum total of 4,018 francs 85 centimes, the amount of the 3 bills and expenses already incurred. On the morning of the very day when Doublon served the writ upon Eve, requiring her to pay a sum so enormous in her eyes, there came a letter like a thunderbolt from Métivier. To Monsieur Séchard Junior, Printer, Angouleme. Sir, your brother-in-law, Monsieur Chardon, is so shamelessly dishonest that he declares his furniture to be the property of an actress with whom he is living. You ought to have informed me candidly of these circumstances, and not have allowed me to go to useless expense over law proceedings. I have received no answer to my letter of the 10th of May last. You must not, therefore, take it amiss if I ask for immediate repayment of the 3 bills and the expenses to which I have been put. Yours, etc., Métivier. Eve had heard nothing during these months, and supposed, in her ignorance of commercial law, that her brother had made reparation for his sins by meeting the forged bills. "Be quick and go at once to Petit Claude, dear," she said. "Tell him about it, and ask his advice." David hurried to his schoolfellow's office. "When you came to tell me of your appointment and offered me your services, I did not think that I should need them so soon," he said. Petit Claud studied the fine face of this man who sat opposite him in the office chair, and scarcely listened to the details of the case, for he knew more of them already than the speaker. As soon as he saw Sechard's anxiety, he said to himself, "The trick has succeeded." This kind of comedy is often played in an attorney's office. Why are the Cointets persecuting him? Petit Claud wondered within himself, for the attorney can use his wit to read his client's thoughts as clearly as the ideas of their opponents, and it is his business to see both sides of the judicial web. "You want to gain time," he said at last, when Sechard had come to an end. "How long do you want? Something like 3 or 4 months?" "Oh, 4 months! That would be my salvation!" exclaimed David. Petit Claud appeared to him as an angel. "Very well, no one shall lay hands on any of your furniture, and no one shall arrest you for 4 months, but it will cost you a great deal," said Petit Claud. What does that matter to me?" cried Sechard. "You are expecting some money to come in, but are you sure of it?" asked Petit Claud, astonished at the way in which his client walked into the toils. "In 3 months' time I shall have plenty of money," said the inventor, with an inventor's hopeful confidence. "Your father is still above ground," suggested Petit Claud. "He is in no hurry to leave his vines." "Do you think that I am counting on my father's death?" returned David. "I am on the track of a trade secret, the secret of making a sheet of paper as strong as Dutch paper without a thread of cotton in it, and at a cost of 50% less than cotton pulp." "There is a fortune in that!" exclaimed Petit Claud. He knew now what the tall Cointet meant. "A large fortune, my friend, for in 10 years' time the demand for paper will be 10 times larger than it is today. Journalism will be the craze of our day." "Nobody knows your secret?" "Nobody except my wife." "You have not told any one what you mean to do? The Cointets, for example?" "I did say something about it, but in general terms, I think." A sudden spark of generosity flashed through Petit Claud's rancorous soul. He tried to reconcile Sechard's interests with the Cointets' projects and his own. "Listen, David, we are old schoolfellows, you and I. I will fight your case, but understand this clearly. The defense, in the teeth of the law, will cost you 5 or 6,000 francs. Do not compromise your prospects. I think you will be compelled to share the profits of your invention with some one of our paper manufacturers. Let us see now. You will think twice before you buy or build a paper mill, and there is the cost of the patent besides. All this means time and money too. The servers of writs will be down upon you too soon, perhaps, although we are going to give them the slip." "I have my secret," said David, with the simplicity of the man of books. "Well and good, your secret will be your plank of safety," said Petit Claud. His first loyal intention of avoiding a lawsuit by a compromise was frustrated. "I do not wish to know it, but mind this that I tell you. Work in the bowels of the earth if you can, so that no one may watch you and gain a hint from your ways of working, or your plank will be stolen from under your feet. An inventor and a simpleton often live in the same skin. Your mind runs so much on your secrets that you cannot think of everything. People will begin to have their suspicions at last, and the place is full of paper manufacturers. So many manufacturers, so many enemies for you. You are like a beaver with the hunters about you. Do not give them your skin." "Thank you, dear fellow, I have told myself all this," exclaimed Sechard. "But I am obliged to you for showing so much concern for me and for your forethought. It does not really matter to me myself. An income of 1,200 francs would be enough for me, and my father ought by rights to leave me 3 times as much some day. Love and thought make up my life, a divine life. I am working for Lucien's sake and for my wife's." "Come, Give me this power of attorney, and think of nothing but your discovery. If there should be any danger of arrest, I will let you know in time, for we must think of all possibilities. And let me tell you again to allow no one of whom you are not so sure as you are of yourself to come into your place." Cerizet did not care to continue the lease of the plant and premises, hence our little money difficulties. We have no one at home now but Marion and Kolb, an Alsatian as trusty as a dog, and my wife and her mother. "One word," said Petit Claud, "don't trust that dog." "You do not know him," exclaimed David. "He is like a second self." "May I try him?" "Yes," said Sechard. "There, good bye, but send Madame Sechard to me. I must have a power of attorney from your wife. And bear in mind, my friend, that there is a fire burning in your affairs," said Petit Claud, by way of warning of all the troubles gathering in the law courts to burst upon David's head. "Here am I with one foot in Burgundy and the other in Champagne," he added to himself as he closed the office door on David. Harassed by money difficulties, beset with fears for his wife's health, stung to the quick by Lucien's disgrace, David had worked on at his problem. He had been trying to find a single process to replace the various operations of pounding and maceration, to which all flax or cotton or rags, any vegetable fibre, in fact, must be subjected. And as he went to Petit Claud's office, he abstractedly chewed a bit of nettle stalk that had been steeping in water. On his way home, tolerably satisfied with his interview, he felt a little pellet sticking between his teeth. He laid it on his hand, flattened it out, and saw that the pulp was far superior to any previous result. The want of cohesion is the great drawback of all vegetable fibre. Straw, for instance, yields a very brittle paper, which may almost be called metallic and resonant. These chances only befall bold inquirers into nature's methods. "Now," said he to himself, "I must contrive to do by machinery and some chemical agency the thing that I myself have done unconsciously." When his wife saw him, his face was radiant with belief in victory. There were traces of tears in Eve's face. "Oh, my darling, do not trouble yourself. Petit Claud will guarantee that we shall not be molested for several months to come. There will be a good deal of expense over it, but as Petit Claud said when he came to the door with me, a Frenchman has a right to keep his creditors waiting, provided he repays them, capital, interest, and costs. Very well, then, we shall do that." "And live meanwhile?" asked poor Eve, who thought of everything. "Ah, that is true," said David, carrying his hand to his ear after the unaccountable fashion of most perplexed mortals. "Mother will look after little Lucien, and I can go back to work again," said she. "Eve, oh, my Eve!" cried David, holding his wife closely to him. At Saintes, not very far from here, in the 16th century, there lived one of the very greatest of Frenchmen, for he was not merely the inventor of glaze, he was the glorious precursor of Buffon and Cuvier besides. He was the first geologist, good simple soul that he was. Bernard Palissy endured the martyrdom appointed for all seekers into secrets, but his wife and children and all his neighbors were against him. His wife used to sell his tools. Nobody understood him. He wandered about the countryside, he was hunted down, they jeered at him. But I am loved." "Dearly loved," said Eve, with the quiet serenity of the love that is sure of itself. "And so may well endure all that poor Bernard Palissy suffered. Bernard Palissy, the discoverer of Écouen Weir, the Huguenot accepted by Charles IX. On the day of Saint Bartholomew. He lived to be rich and honored in his old age, and lectured on the science of earths, as he called it, in the face of Europe. So long as my fingers can hold an iron, you shall want for nothing," cried the poor wife, in tones that told of the deepest devotion. When I was Madame Bruyère's forewoman, I had a friend among the girls, Bassine Clerget, a cousin of Postel's, a very good child. Well, Bassine told me the other day when she brought back the linen that she was taking Madame Bruyère's business. I will work for her." "Ah, you shall not work there for long," said David. "I have found out." Eve, watching his face, saw the sublime belief in success which sustains the inventor, the belief that gives him courage to go forth into the virgin forests of the country of discovery, and, for the first time in her life, she answered that confident look with a half sad smile. David bent his head mournfully. "Oh, my dear, I am not laughing. I did not doubt. It was not a sneer," cried Eve, on her knees before her husband. "But I see plainly now that you were right to tell me nothing about your experiments and your hopes. Ah, yes, dear, an inventor should endure the long painful travail of a great idea alone. He should not utter a word of it, even to his wife. A woman is a woman still. This Eve of yours could not help smiling when she heard you say, 'I have found out,' for the 17th time this month." David burst out laughing so heartily at his own expense that Eve caught his hand in hers and kissed it reverently. It was a delicious moment for them both, one of those roses of love and tenderness that grow beside the desert paths of the bitterest poverty, nay, at times in yet darker depths. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Eve and David by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Perry. Chapter 6. As the storm of misfortune grew, Eve's courage redoubled. The greatness of her husband's nature, his inventor's simplicity, the tears that now and again she saw in the eyes of this dreamer of dreams with the tender heart, all these things aroused in her an unsuspected energy of resistance. Once again she tried the plan that had succeeded so well already. She wrote to M. Métivier, reminding him that the printing office was for sale, offered to pay him out of the proceeds, and begged him not to ruin David with needless costs. Métivier received the heroic letter and shammed dead. His head clerk replied that in the absence of M. Métivier he could not take it upon himself to stay proceedings, for his employer had made it a rule to let the law take its course. Eve wrote again, offering this time to renew the bills and pay all the costs hitherto incurred. To this the clerk consented, provided that Séchard senior guaranteed payment. So Eve walked over to Marsac, taking Kolb and her mother with her. She braved the old vine-dresser, and so charming was she, that the old man's face relaxed, and the puckers smoothed out at the sight of her. But when, with inward quakings, she came to speak of a guarantee, she beheld a sudden and complete change of the typolographic countenance. "If I allowed my son to put his hand to the lips of my cash-box whenever he had a mind, he would plunge it deep into the vitals, he would take all I have," cried old Séchard. "That is the way with children, they eat up their parents' purse. What did I do myself, eh? I never cost my parents a farthing. Your printing office is standing idle, the rats and the mice do all the printing that is done in it. You have a pretty face, I am very fond of you. You are a careful, hard-working woman, but that son of mine! Do you know what David is? I'll tell you. He is a scholar that will never do a stroke of work. If I had reared him as I was reared myself, without knowing his letters, and if I had made a bear of him, like his father before him, he would have money saved and put out to interest by now. Oh, he is my cross, that fellow is, look you. And unluckily he is all the family I have, for there is never like to be a later edition. And when he makes you unhappy—" Eve protested with a vehement gesture of denial. "Yes, he does," affirmed old Séchard. "You had to find a wet nurse for the child. Come, come, I know all about it. You are in the county court, and the whole town is talking about you. I was only a bear. I have no book learning. I was not foreman at the Didots, the first printers in the world. But yet I never set eyes on a bit of stamped paper. Do you know what I say to myself as I go to and fro among my vines, looking after them and getting in my vintage and doing my bits of business? I say to myself, you are taking a lot of trouble, poor old chap, working to pile one silver crown on another. You will leave a fine property behind you, and the bailiffs and the lawyers will get it all, or else it will go in nonsensical notions and crotchets. Look you here, child, you are the mother of yonder little lad. It seemed to me as I held him at the font with Madame Chardon that I could see his old grandfather's copper nose on his face. Very well, think less of Séchard and more of that little rascal. I can trust no one but you. You will prevent him from squandering my property, my poor property."
"But, dear Papa Séchard, your son will be a credit to you, you will see. He will make money and be a rich man one of these days, and wear the cross of the Legion of Honor at his buttonhole."
"What is he going to do to get it?"
"You will see. But meanwhile, would 1,000 crowns ruin you? 1,000 crowns would put an end to the proceedings. Well, if you cannot trust him, lend the money to me. I will pay it back. You could make it a charge on my portion, on my earnings."
"Then has some one brought David into a court of law?" cried the vine-dresser, amazed to find that the gossip was really true. "See what comes of knowing how to write your name! And how about my rent? Oh, little girl, I must go to Angouleme at once and ask Cachan's advice, and see that I am straight. You did right well to come over. Forewarned is forearmed." After 2 hours of argument, Eve was fain to go, defeated by the unanswerable dictum, "Women never understand business." She had come with a faint hope. She went back again almost heartbroken, and reached home just in time to receive notice of judgment. Séchard must pay Métivier in full. The appearance of a bailiff at a house door is an event in a country town, and Doublon had come far too often of late. The whole neighborhood was talking about the Séchards. Eve dared not leave her house; she dreaded to hear the whispers as she passed. "Oh, my brother!" cried poor Eve, as she hurried into the passage and up the stairs. "I can never forgive you, unless it was—" "Alas, it was that or suicide," said David, who had followed her. "Let us say no more about it," she said quietly. "The woman who dragged him down into the depths of Paris has much to answer for, and your father, my David, is quite inexorable. Let us bear it in silence." A discreet rapping at the door cut short some word of love on David's lips. Marion appeared, towing the big burly Kolb after her across the outer room. "Madame," said Marion, "we have known, Kolb and I, that you and the master were very much put about, and as we have 1,100 francs of savings between us, we thought we could not do better than put them in the mistress's hands." "Die mistress," echoed Kolb fervently. "Kolb," cried David, "you and I will never part. Pay 1,000 francs on account to Maitre Cachan, and take a receipt for it. We will keep the rest. And Kolb, no power on earth must extract a word from you as to my work, or my absences from home, or the things you may see me bring back. And if I send you to look for plants for me, you know, no human being must set eyes on you. They will try to corrupt you, my good Kolb. They will offer you thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of francs, to tell." "Dey may offer me millions," cried Kolb, "but not ein vort from me shall dey tra. Have I not been in der army and know my orders?" "Well, you are warned. March, and ask Monsieur Petit Claud to go with you as witness." "Yes," said the Alsatian. "Some tay I hope to be rich enough to dust der jacket of dat man of law. I don't like his countenance." "Kolb is a good man, madame," said big Marion. "He is as strong as a Turk and as meek as a lamb. Just the one that would make a woman happy.
It was his notion, too, to invest our savings this way, safings, as he calls them. Poor man, if he doesn't speak right, he thinks right, and I understand him all the same. He has a notion of working for somebody else so as to save us his keep. Surely we shall be rich, if it is only to repay these good folk, said David, looking at his wife. Eve thought it quite simple. It was no surprise to her to find other natures on a level with her own. The dullest, nay, the most indifferent observer could have seen all the beauty of her nature in her way of receiving this service. "You will be rich some day, dear master," said Marion. "Your bread is ready baked. Your father has just bought another farm. He is putting by money for you, that he is." And under the circumstances, did not Marion show an exquisite delicacy of feeling by belittling, as it were, her kindness in this way? French procedure, like all things human, has its defects. Nevertheless, the sword of justice, being a two-edged weapon, is excellently adapted alike for attack or defense. Procedure, moreover, has its amusing side. For when opposed, lawyers arrive at an understanding, as they well may do, without exchanging a word. Through their manner of conducting their case, a suit becomes a kind of war waged on the lines laid down by the first Marshal Biron, who, at the siege of Rouen, it may be remembered, received his son's project for taking the city in 2 days, with the remark, "You must be in a great hurry to go and plant cabbages." Let two commanders in chief spare their troops as much as possible, let them imitate the Austrian generals who give the men time to eat their soup though they fail to effect a juncture, and escape reprimand from the Aulic Council. Let them avoid all decisive measures, and they shall carry on a war for ever. Maitre Cachan, Petit Claud, and Doublon did better than the Austrian generals. They took for their example Quintus Fabius Cunctator, the Austrian of antiquity. Petit Claud, malignant as a mule, was not long in finding out all the advantages of his position. No sooner had Boniface Cointet guaranteed his costs than he vowed to lead Cachan a dance, and to dazzle the paper manufacturer with a brilliant display of genius in the creation of items to be charged to Métivier. Unluckily for the fame of the young forensic Figaro, the writer of this history is obliged to pass over the scene of his exploits in as great a hurry as if he trod on burning coals. But a single bill of costs, in the shape of the specimen sent from Paris, will no doubt suffice for the student of contemporary manners. Let us follow the example set us by the bulletins of the Grande Armée, and give a summary of Petit Claud's valiant feats and exploits in the province of pure law. They will be the better appreciated for concise treatment. David Sechard was summoned before the Tribunal of Commerce at Angouleme for the 3rd of July, made default, and notice of judgment was served on the 8th. On the 10th, Doublon obtained an execution warrant and attempted to put in an execution on the 12th. On this, Petit Claud applied for an interpleader summons, and served notice on Métivier for that day fortnight. Métivier made application for a hearing without delay, and on the 19th Sechard's application was dismissed. Hard upon this followed notice of judgment, authorizing the issue of an execution warrant on the 22nd, a warrant of arrest on the 23rd, and bailiff's inventory previous to the execution on the 24th. Métivier, Doublon, Cachan, and company were proceeding at this furious pace when Petit Claud suddenly pulled them up and stayed execution by lodging notice of appeal on the Court Royal. Notice of appeal, duly reiterated on the 25th of July, drew Métivier off to Poitiers. "Come," said Petit Claud to himself, "there we are likely to stop for some time to come." No sooner was the storm passed over to Poitiers, and an attorney practising in the Court Royal instructed to defend the case, than Petit Claud, a champion facing both ways, made application in Madame Sechard's name for the immediate separation of her estate from her husband's.
using all diligence in legal language to such purpose that he obtained an order from the court on the 28th, and inserted notice at once in the Charente Courrier. Now David the lover had settled 10,000 francs upon his wife in the marriage contract, making over to her as security the fixtures of the printing office and the household furniture; and Petit Claud, therefore, constituted Madame Sechard her husband's creditor for that small amount, drawing up a statement of her claims on the estate in the presence of a notary on the 1st of August. While Petit Claud was busy securing the household property of his clients, he gained the day at Poitiers on the point of law on which the demurrer and appeals were based. He held that, as the Court of the Seine had ordered the plaintiff to pay costs of proceedings in the Paris Commercial Court, David was so much the less liable for expenses of litigation incurred upon Lucien's account. The Court Royal took this view of the case, and judgment was entered accordingly. David Sechard was ordered to pay the amount in dispute in the Angouleme court, less the law expenses incurred in Paris. These Métivier must pay, and each side must bear its own costs in appeal to the Court Royal. David Sechard was duly notified of the result on the 17th of August. On the 18th the judgment took the practical shape of an order to pay capital, interest, and costs, followed up by notice of an execution for the morrow. Upon this, Petit Claud intervened and put in a claim for the furniture as the wife's property, duly separated from her husband's; and what was more, Petit Claud produced Sechard senior upon the scene of action. The old vine grower had become his client on this wise: he came to Angouleme on the day after Eve's visit, and went to Maitre Cachan for advice. His son owed him arrears of rent. How could he come by this rent in the scrimmage in which his son was engaged? "I am engaged by the other side," pronounced Cachan, "and I cannot appear for the father when I am suing the son. But go to Petit Claud. He is very clever; he may perhaps do even better for you than I should do." Cachan and Petit Claud met at the court. "I have sent you Sechard senior," said Cachan. "Take the case for me in exchange." Lawyers do each other services of this kind in country towns as well as in Paris. The day after Sechard senior gave Petit Claud his confidence, the tall Cointet paid a visit to his confederate. "Try to give old Sechard a lesson," he said. "He is the kind of man that will never forgive his son for costing him 1,000 francs or so. The outlay will dry up any generous thoughts in his mind, if he ever has any." "Go back to your vines," said Petit Claud to his new client. "Your son is not very well off. Do not eat him out of house and home. I will send for you when the time comes." On behalf of Sechard senior, therefore, Petit Claud claimed that the presses, being fixtures, were so much the more to be regarded as tools and implements of trade, and the less liable to seizure, in that the house had been a printing office since the reign of Louis XIV. Cachan, on Métivier's account, waxed indignant at this. In Paris, Lucien's furniture had belonged to Coralie, and here again, in Angouleme, David's goods and chattels all belonged to his wife or his father. Pretty things were said in court. Father and son were summoned; such claims could not be allowed to stand. "We mean to unmask the frauds entrenched behind bad faith of a most formidable kind. Here is the defense of dishonesty, bristling with the plainest and most innocent articles of the Code. And why? To avoid repayment of 3,000 francs. Obtained how? From poor Métivier's cash box. And yet there are those who dare to say a word against bill discounters. What times we live in! Now, I put it to you, what is this but taking your neighbor's money? You will surely not sanction a claim which would bring immorality to the very core of justice." Cachan's eloquence produced an effect on the court. A divided judgment was given in favor of Madame Sechard, the house furniture being held to be her property, and against Sechard senior, who was ordered to pay costs, 434 francs 65 centimes. "It is kind of old Sechard," laughed the lawyers. "He would have a finger in the pie, so let him pay." Notice of judgment was given on the 26th of August. The presses and plant could be seized on the 28th. Placards were posted. Application was made for an order empowering them to sell on the spot. Announcements of the sale appeared in the papers, and Doublon flattered himself that the inventory should be verified and the auction take place on the 2nd of September. By this time David Sechard owed Metivier 5,275 francs, 25 centimes, to say nothing of interest, by formal judgment confirmed by appeal, the bill of costs having been duly taxed. Likewise, to Petit Claud he owed 1,200 francs, exclusive of the fees, which were left to David's generosity, with the generous confidence displayed by the hackney coachman who has driven you so quickly over the road on which you desire to go. Madame Sechard owed Petit Claud something like 350 francs and fees besides, and of old Sechard, besides 434 francs 65 centimes, the little attorney demanded 100 crowns by way of fee. Altogether, the Sechard family owed about 10,000 francs. This is what is called putting fire into the bedstraw. Apart from the utility of these documents to other nations, who thus may behold the battery of French law in action, the French legislator ought to know the lengths to which the abuse of procedure may be carried, always supposing that the said legislator can find time for reading. Surely some sort of regulation might be devised, some way of forbidding lawyers to carry on a case until the sum in dispute is more than eaten up in costs. Is there not something ludicrous in the idea of submitting a square yard of soil and an estate of thousands of acres to the same legal formalities? These bare outlines of the history of the various stages of procedure should open the eyes of Frenchmen to the meaning of the words legal formalities, justice, and costs, little as the immense majority of the nations know about them. 5,000 pounds weight of type in the printing office were worth 2,000 francs as old metal. The 3 presses were valued at 600 francs. The rest of the plant would fetch the price of old iron and firewood. The household furniture would have brought in 1,000 francs at most. The whole personal property of Sechard junior therefore represented the sum of 4,000 francs, and Cachan and Petit Claud made claims for 7,000 francs in costs already incurred, to say nothing of expenses to come, for the blossom gave promise of fine fruits enough, as the reader will shortly see. Surely the lawyers of France and Navarre, nay, even of Normandy herself, will not refuse Petit Claud his meed of admiration and respect. Surely, too, kind hearts will give Marion and Kolb a tear of sympathy. All through the war, Kolb sat on a chair in the doorway, acting as watchdog, when David had nothing else for him to do. It was Kolb who received all the notifications, and a clerk of Petit Claud's kept watch over Kolb. No sooner were the placards announcing the auction put up on the premises than Kolb tore them down. He hurried round the town after the bill poster, tearing the placards from the walls. "Ah, scoundrels!" he cried, "to torment so good a man, and they calls it justice!" Marion made half a franc a day by working half-time in a paper mill as a machine tender, and her wages contributed to the support of the household. Madame Chardon went back uncomplainingly to her old occupation, sitting up night after night and bringing home her wages at the end of the week. Poor Madame Chardon! Twice already she had made a 9 days' prayer for those she loved, wondering that God should be so deaf to her petitions and blind to the light of the candles on his altar. On the 2nd of September a letter came from Lucien, the first since the letter of the winter, which David had kept from his wife's knowledge, the announcement of the 3 bills which bore David's signature. This time Lucien wrote to Eve.
"The third since he left us," she said. Poor sister, she was afraid to open the envelope that covered the fatal sheet. She was feeding the little one when the post came in. They could not afford a wet nurse now, and the child was being brought up by hand. Her state of mind may be imagined, and David's also, when he had been roused to read the letter, for David had been at work all night and only lay down at daybreak. Lucien to Eve. Paris, August 29th. My dear sister, 2 days ago, at 5 o'clock in the morning, one of God's noblest creatures breathed her last in my arms. She was the one woman on earth capable of loving me as you and mother and David love me, giving me besides that unselfish affection, something that neither mother nor sister can give, the utmost bliss of love. Poor Coralie, after giving up everything for my sake, may perhaps have died for me, who at this moment have not the wherewithal to bury her. She could have solaced my life. You, and you alone, my dear good angels, can console me for her death. God has forgiven her, I think, the innocent girl, for she died like a Christian. Oh, this Paris! Eve, Paris is the glory and the shame of France. Many illusions I have lost here already, and I have others yet to lose when I begin to beg for the little money needed before I can lay the body of my angel in consecrated earth. Your unhappy brother, Lucien. P.S. I must have given you much trouble by my heedlessness. Some day you will know all, and you will forgive me. You must be quite easy now. A worthy merchant, a Monsieur Camusot, to whom I once caused cruel pangs, promised to arrange everything, seeing that Coralie and I were so much distressed. "The sheet is still moist with his tears," said Eve, looking at the letter with a heart so full of sympathy that something of the old love for Lucien shone in her eyes. "Poor fellow, he must have suffered cruelly if he has been loved as he says," exclaimed Eve's husband, happy in his love, and these two forgot all their own troubles at this cry of a supreme sorrow. Just at that moment Marion rushed in. "Madame," she panted, "here they are, here they are." "Who is here?" "Doublon and his men, bad luck to them. Kolb will not let them come in. They have come to sell us up." "No, no, they are not going to sell you up, never fear," cried a voice in the next room, and Petit Claud appeared upon the scene. "I have just lodged notice of appeal. We ought not to sit down under a judgment that attaches a stigma of bad faith to us. I did not think it worth while to fight the case here. I let Cachan talk to gain time for you. I am sure of gaining the day at Poitiers." "But how much will it cost to win the day?" asked Madame Sechard. "Fees if you win, 1,000 francs if we lose our case." "Oh dear!" cried poor Eve. "Why, the remedy is worse than the disease." Petit Claud was not a little confused at this cry of innocence, enlightened by the progress of the flames of litigation. It struck him too that Eve was a very beautiful woman. In the middle of the discussion, old Sechard arrived, summoned by Petit Claud. The old man's presence in the chamber where his little grandson in the cradle lay smiling at misfortune completed the scene. The young attorney at once addressed the newcomer with: "You owe me 700 francs for the interpleader, Papa Sechard, but you can charge the amount to your son, in addition to the arrears of rent." The vinedresser felt the sting of the sarcasm conveyed by Petit Claud's tone and manner. "It would have cost you less to give security for the debt at first," said Eve, leaving the cradle to greet her father-in-law with a kiss. David, quite overcome by the sight of the crowd outside the house, for Kolb's resistance to Doublon's men had collected a knot of people, could only hold out a hand to his father. He did not say a word. "And how, pray, do I come to owe you 700 francs?" the old man asked, looking at Petit Claud. "Why, in the first place, I am engaged by you. Your rent is in question.
So, as far as I am concerned, you and our debtor are one and the same person. If your son does not pay my costs in the case, you must pay them yourself. But this is nothing. In a few hours David will be put in prison. Will you allow him to go?" "What does he owe?" "Something like 5 or 6,000 francs, besides the amounts owing to you and to his wife." The speech roused all the old man's suspicions at once. He looked round the little blue and white bedroom at the touching scene before his eyes, at a beautiful woman weeping over a cradle, at David bowed down by anxieties, and then again at the lawyer. This was a trap set for him by that lawyer. Perhaps they wanted to work upon his paternal feelings, to get money out of him? That was what it all meant. He took alarm. He went over to the cradle and fondled the child, who held out both little arms to him. No heir to an English peerage could be more tenderly cared for than this little one in that house of trouble. His little embroidered cap was lined with pale pink. "Ah, let David get out of it as best he may. I am thinking of this child here," cried the old grandfather, "and the child's mother will approve of that. David, that knows so much, must know how to pay his debts." "Now, I will just put your meaning into plain language," said Petit Claud ironically. "Look here, Papa Sechard, you are jealous of your son. Hear the truth. You put David into his present position by selling the business to him for 3 times its value. You ruined him to make an extortionate bargain. Yes, don't shake your head. You sold the newspaper to the Cointet and pocketed all the proceeds, and that was as much as the whole business was worth. You bear David a grudge, not merely because you have plundered him, but because also your own son is a man far above yourself. You profess to be prodigiously fond of your grandson, to cloak your want of feeling for your son and his wife, because you ought to pay down money, hic et nunc, for them, while you need only show a posthumous affection for your grandson. You pretend to be fond of the little fellow, lest you should be taxed with want of feeling for your own flesh and blood. That is the bottom of it, Papa Sechard." "Did you fetch me over to hear this?" asked the old man, glowering at his lawyer, his daughter-in-law, and his son in turn.
"Monsieur," protested poor Eve, turning to Petit Claud, "have you vowed to ruin us? My husband had never uttered a word against his father." Here the old man looked cunningly at her. "David has told me scores of times that you loved him in your way," she added, looking at her father-in-law and understanding his suspicions. Petit Claud was only following out the tall Cointet's instructions. He was widening the breach between the father and son, lest Sechard senior should extricate David from his intolerable position. "The day that David Sechard goes to prison shall be the day of your introduction to Madame de Senonches," the tall Cointet had said no longer ago than yesterday. Madame Sechard, with the quick insight of love, had divined Petit Claud's mercenary hostility, even as she had once before felt instinctively that Cerizet was a traitor. As for David, his astonishment may be imagined. He could not understand how Petit Claud came to know so much of his father's nature and his own history. Upright and honorable as he was, he did not dream of the relations between his lawyer and the Cointets, nor, for that matter, did he know that the Cointets were at work behind Metivier. Meanwhile, old Sechard took his son's silence as an insult, and Petit Claud, taking advantage of his client's bewilderment, beat a retreat. "Good bye, my dear David. You have had warning. Notice of appeal doesn't invalidate the warrant for arrest. It is the only course left open to your creditors, and it will not be long before they take it. So go away at once. Or rather, if you will take my advice, go to the Cointets and see them about it. They have capital. If your invention is perfected and answers the purpose, go into partnership with them. After all, they are very good fellows." "Your invention?" broke in old Sechard.
Why, do you suppose that your son is fool enough to let his business slip away from him without thinking of something else?" exclaimed the attorney. "He is on the brink of the discovery of a way of making paper at a cost of 3 francs per ream instead of 10, he tells me." "One more dodge for taking me in. You are all as thick as thieves in a fair. If David has found out such a plan, he has no need of me. He is a millionaire. Good-bye, my dears, and a good day to you all." And the old man disappeared down the staircase. "Find some way of hiding yourself," was Petit Claud's parting word to David, and with that he hurried out to exasperate old Sechard still further. He found the vine grower growling to himself outside in the Place du Mûrier, went with him as far as L'Houmeau, and there left him with a threat of putting in an execution for the costs due to him unless they were paid before the week was out. "I will pay you if you will show me how to disinherit my son without injuring my daughter-in-law or the boy," said old Sechard, and they parted forthwith. How well the tall Cointet knows the folk he is dealing with! It is just as he said. Those 700 francs will prevent the father from paying 7,000, the little lawyer thought within himself as he climbed the path to Angouleme. Still, that old slyboots of a paper maker must not overreach us. It is time to ask him for something besides promises. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Evan David by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 7. "Well, David, dear, what do you mean to do?" asked Eve, when the lawyer had followed her father-in-law. "Marion, put your biggest pot on the fire," called David. "I have my secret fast." At this Eve put on her bonnet and shawl and walking shoes with feverish haste. "Kolb, my friend, get ready to go out," she said, "and come with me. If there is any way out of this hell, I must find it." When Eve had gone out, Marion spoke to David. "Do be sensible, sir," she said, "or the mistress will fret herself to death. Make some money to pay off your debts, and then you can try to find treasure at your ease." "Don't talk, Marion," said David. "I am going to overcome my last difficulty, and then I can apply for the patent and the improvement on the patent at the same time." This improvement on the patent is the curse of the French patentee. A man may spend 10 years of his life in working out some obscure industrial problem, and when he has invented some piece of machinery or made a discovery of some kind, he takes out a patent and imagines that he has a right to his own invention. Then there comes a competitor, and unless the first inventor has foreseen all possible contingencies, the second comer makes an improvement on the patent with a screw or a nut, and takes the whole thing out of his hands. The discovery of a cheap material for paper pulp, therefore, is by no means the conclusion of the whole matter. David Sechard was anxiously looking ahead on all sides, lest the fortune sought in the teeth of such difficulties should be snatched out of his hands at the last. Dutch paper, as flax paper is still called, though it is no longer made in Holland, is slightly sized, but every sheet is sized separately by hand, and this increases the cost of production. If it were possible to discover some way of sizing the paper in the pulping trough with some inexpensive glue, like that in use today, though even now it is not quite perfect, there would be no improvement on the patent to fear. For the past month, accordingly, David had been making experiments in sizing pulp. He had 2 discoveries before him. Eve went to see her mother. Fortunately, it so happened that Madame Chardon was nursing the deputy magistrate's wife, who had just given the Milots of Nevers an heir presumptive, and Eve, in her distrust of all attorneys and notaries, took into her head to apply for advice to the legal guardian of widows and orphans. She wanted to know if she could relieve David from his embarrassments by taking them upon herself, and selling her claims upon the estate, and besides, she had some hope of discovering the truth as to Petit Claud's unaccountable conduct. The official, struck with Mme. Sechard's beauty, received her not only with the respect due to a woman, but with a sort of courtesy to which Eve was not accustomed. She saw in the magistrate's face an expression which, since her marriage, she had seen in no eyes but Kolb's, and for a beautiful woman like Eve, this expression is the criterion by which men are judged. When passion or self-interest or age dims that spark of unquestioning fealty that gleams in a young man's eyes, a woman feels a certain mistrust of him and begins to observe him critically. The Cointets, Cerizet, and Petit Claud, all the men whom Eve felt instinctively to be her enemies, had turned hard, indifferent eyes on her. With the deputy magistrate, therefore, she felt at ease, although, in spite of his kindly courtesy, he swept all her hopes away by his first words. "It is not certain, madame, that the Court Royal will reverse the judgment of the court restricting your lien on your husband's property for payment of moneys due to you by the terms of your marriage contract to household goods and chattels. Your privilege ought not to be used to defraud the other creditors. But in any case, you will be allowed to take your share of the proceeds with the other creditors, and your father-in-law likewise as a privileged creditor, for arrears of rent. When the court has given the order, other points may be raised as to the contribution, as we call it, when a schedule of the debts is drawn up, and the creditors are paid a dividend in proportion to their claims."
"Then Monsieur Petit Claud is bringing us to bankruptcy!" she cried.
"Petit Claud is carrying out your husband's instructions," said the magistrate. "He is anxious to gain time, so his attorney says. In my opinion, you would perhaps do better to waive the appeal and buy in at the sale the indispensable implements for carrying on the business. You and your father-in-law together might do this, you to the extent of your claim through your marriage contract, and he for his arrears of rent. But that would be bringing the matter to an end too soon, perhaps. The lawyers are making a good thing out of your case."
"But then I should be entirely in Monsieur Sechard's father's hands. I should owe him the hire of the machinery as well as the house rent, and my husband would still be open to further proceedings from Monsieur Metivier, for Monsieur Metivier would have had almost nothing."
"That is true, madame."
"Very well, then we should be even worse off than we are."
"The arm of the law, madame, is at the creditor's disposal. You have received 3,000 francs, and you must of necessity repay the money."
"Oh, sir, can you think that we are capable—"
Eve suddenly came to a stop. She saw that her justification might injure her brother. "Oh, I know quite well that it is an obscure affair, that the debtors on the one side are honest, scrupulous, and even behaving handsomely, and the creditor, on the other, is only a cat's paw." Eve, aghast, looked at him with bewildered eyes. "You can understand," he continued, with a look full of homely shrewdness, "that we on the bench have plenty of time to think over all that goes on under our eyes, while the gentlemen in court are arguing with each other." Eve went home in despair over her useless effort. That evening at 7 o'clock, Doublon came with the notification of imprisonment for debt. The proceedings had reached the acute stage. "After this, I can only go out after nightfall," said David. Eve and Mme. Chardon burst into tears. To be in hiding was for them a shameful thing. As for Kolb and Marion, they were more alarmed for David, because they had long since made up their minds that there was no guile in their master's nature. So frightened were they on his account, that they came upstairs under pretence of asking whether they could do anything, and found Eve and Mme. Chardon in tears. The three, whose life had been so straightforward hitherto, were overcome by the thought that David must go into hiding. And now, moreover, could they hope to escape the invisible spies who henceforth would dog every least movement of a man unluckily so absent-minded? "Gif Montame will wait ein little quarter-hour, she can reconnoitre der enemy's camp," put in Kolb. "You shall see dat I understand mein business, for gif I look like ein German, I am ein true Frenchman, and what is more, I am very cunning." "Oh, madame, do let him go," begged Marion. "He is only thinking of saving his master; he hasn't another thought in his head. Kolb is not an Alsatian; he is well, a regular Newfoundland dog for rescuing folk." "Go, my good Kolb," said David. "We have still time to do something." Kolb hurried off to pay a visit to the bailiff, and it so fell out that David's enemies were in Doublon's office, holding a council as to the best way of securing him. The arrest of a debtor is an unheard of thing in the country, an abnormal proceeding if ever there was one. Everybody in the first place knows everybody else, and creditor and debtor being bound to meet each other daily all their lives long, nobody likes to take this odious course. When a defaulter, to use the provincial term for a debtor, for they do not mince their words in the provinces when speaking of this legalized method of helping yourself to another man's goods, when a defaulter plans a failure on a large scale, he takes sanctuary in Paris. Paris is a kind of city of refuge for provincial bankrupts, an almost impenetrable retreat. The writ of the pursuing bailiff has no force beyond the limits of his jurisdiction, and there are other obstacles rendering it almost invalid. Wherefore the Paris bailiff is empowered to enter the house of a third party to seize the person of the debtor, while for the bailiff of the provinces the domicile is absolutely inviolable. The law probably makes this exception as to Paris, because there it is the rule for 2 or more families to live under the same roof; but in the provinces the bailiff who wishes to make forcible entry must have an order from the justice of the peace, and so wide a discretion is allowed the justice of the peace that he is practically able to give or withhold assistance to the bailiffs. To the honor of the justices it should be said that they dislike the office, and are by no means anxious to assist blind passions or revenge. There are besides other and no less serious difficulties in the way of arrest for debt, difficulties which tend to temper the severity of legislation, and public opinion not infrequently makes a dead letter of the law. In great cities there are poor or degraded wretches enough. Poverty and vice know no scruples, and consent to play the spy. But in a little country town, people know each other too well to earn wages of the bailiff. The meanest creature who should lend himself to dirty work of this kind would be forced to leave the place. In the absence of recognized machinery, therefore, the arrest of a debtor is a problem presenting no small difficulty. It becomes a kind of strife of ingenuity between the bailiff and the debtor, and matter for many pleasant stories in the newspapers. Cointet the elder did not choose to appear in the affair, but the fat Cointet openly said that he was acting for Metivier, and went to Doublon, taking Cerizet with him. Cerizet was his foreman now, and had promised his cooperation in return for a 1,000-franc note. Doublon could reckon upon 2 of his understrappers, and thus the Cointets had 4 bloodhounds already on the victim's track. At the actual time of arrest, Doublon could furthermore count upon the police force, who are bound, if required, to assist a bailiff in the performance of his duty. The 2 men, Doublon himself, and the visitors were all closeted together in the private office, beyond the public office, on the ground floor. A tolerably well-paved lobby, a kind of passageway, led to the public office. The gilded scutcheons of the court, with the word bailiff printed thereon in large black letters, hung outside on the house wall on either side the door. Both office windows gave upon the street and were protected by heavy iron bars, but the private office looked into the garden at the back, wherein Doublon, an adorer of Pomona, grew espaliers with marked success. Opposite the office door you beheld the door of the kitchen, and beyond the kitchen the staircase that ascended to the first story. The house was situated in a narrow street at the back of the new law courts, then in process of construction, and only finished after 1830. These details are necessary if Kolb's adventures are to be intelligible to the reader. It was Kolb's idea to go to the bailiff, to pretend to be willing to betray his master, and in this way to discover the traps which would be laid for David. Kolb told the servant who opened the door that he wanted to speak to Monsieur Doublon on business. The servant was busy washing up her plates and dishes, and not very well pleased at Kolb's interruption. She pushed open the door of the outer office, and bade him wait there till her master was at liberty. Then, as he was a stranger to her, she told the master in the private office that a man wanted to speak to him. Now, a man so invariably means a peasant that Doublon said, "Tell him to wait," and Kolb took a seat close to the door of the private office. There were voices talking within. "Ah, by the by, how do you mean to set about it? For if we can catch him tomorrow, it will be so much time saved." It was the fat Cointet who spoke. "Nothing easier. The gaffer has come fairly by his nickname," said Cerizet. At the sound of the fat Cointet's voice, Kolb guessed at once that they were talking about his master, especially as the sense of the words began to dawn upon him. But when he recognized Cerizet's tones, his astonishment grew more and more. "Und dat fellow hath eaten his bread," he thought, horror-stricken. "We must do it in this way, boys," said Doublon. "We will post our men at good long intervals along the Rue de Beaulieu and the Place du Murier in every direction, so that we can follow the gaffer, I like that word, without his knowledge. We will not lose sight of him until he is safe inside the house where he means to lie in hiding, as he thinks. There we will leave him in peace for a while. Then some fine day we will come across him before sunrise or sunset. But what is he doing now, at this moment? He may be slipping through our fingers," said the fat Cointet. "He is in his house," answered Doublon. "If he left it, I should know. I have one witness posted in the Place du Murier, another at the corner of the law courts, and another 30 paces from the house. If our man came out, they would whistle. He could not make 3 paces from his door, but I should know of it at once from the signal." Bailiffs speak of their understrappers by the polite title of witnesses. Here was better hap than Kolb had expected. He went noiselessly out of the office and spoke to the maid in the kitchen. "Meester Doublon is engaged for some time to come," he said. "I will come back early to-morrow morning." A sudden idea had struck the Alsatian, and he proceeded to put it into execution. Kolb had served in a cavalry regiment. He hurried off to see a livery stable keeper, an acquaintance of his, picked out a horse, had it saddled, and rushed back to the Place du Murier. He found Madame Eve in the lowest depths of despondency. "What is it, Kolb?" asked David, when the Alsatian's face looked in upon them, scared but radiant. "You have scoundrels all around you. The safest way is to hide the master. Have Montame thought of hiding the master anywheres?" When Kolb, honest fellow, had explained the whole history of Cerizet's treachery, of the circle traced about the house, and of the fat Cointet's interest in the affair, and given the family some inkling of the schemes set on foot by the Cointets against the master, then David's real position gradually became fatally clear. "It is the Cointets' doing!" cried poor Eve, aghast at the news. "They are proceeding against you. That accounts for Metivier's hardness. They are paper makers. David, they want your secret." "But what can we do to escape them?" exclaimed Madame Chardon. "If the mistress has some little place where the master could be hidden," said Kolb, "I promise to take him there so that nobody shall know." "Wait till nightfall and go to Basine Clerget," said Eve.
I will go now and arrange it all with her. In this case, Basine will be like another self to me." "Spies will follow you," David said at last, recovering some presence of mind. "How can we find a way of communicating with Basine if none of us can go to her?" "Montame can go," said Kolb. "Here is my scheme. I go out mit der master. We draws der whistlers on our track. Montame can go to Mademoiselle Clerchet. Nobody will follow her. I have a horse. I take de master up behind, und der Teufel is in it if they catches us." "Very well. Good-bye, dear," said poor Eve, springing to her husband's arms. "None of us can go to see you, the risk is too great. We must say good-bye for the whole time that your imprisonment lasts. We will write to each other. Basine will post your letters, and I will write under cover to her." No sooner did David and Kolb come out of the house than they heard a sharp whistle, and were followed to the livery stable. Once there, Kolb took his master up behind him, with a caution to keep tight hold. "Whistle away, mein good friends, I care not one rap," cried Kolb. "You will not datch an old trooper," and the old cavalryman clapped both spurs to his horse, and was out into the country and the darkness, not merely before the spies could follow, but before they had time to discover the direction that he took. Eve, meanwhile, went out on the tolerably ingenious pretext of asking advice of Postel, sat a while enduring the insulting pity that spends itself in words, left the Postel family, and stole away unseen to Basine Clerget, told her troubles, and asked for help and shelter. Basine, for greater safety, had brought Eve into her bedroom, and now she opened the door of a little closet, lighted only by a skylight, in such a way that prying eyes could not see into it. The two friends unstopped the flue which opened into the chimney of the stove in the workroom, where the girls heated their irons. Eve and Basine spread ragged coverlets over the brick floor to deaden any sound that David might make, put in a truckle bed, a stove for his experiments, and a table and a chair. Basine promised to bring food in the night, and as no one had occasion to enter her room, David might defy his enemies, one and all, or even detectives. "At last," Eve said, with her arms about her friend, "at last he is in safety." Eve went back to Postel to submit a fresh doubt that had occurred to her, she said. She would like the opinion of such an experienced member of the Chamber of Commerce. She so managed that he escorted her home, and listened patiently to his commiseration. "Would this have happened if you had married me?" All the little druggist's remarks were pitched in this key. Then he went home again to find Madame Postel jealous of Madame Sechard, and furious with her spouse for his polite attention to that beautiful woman. The apothecary advanced the opinion that little red-haired women were preferable to tall, dark women, who, like fine horses, were always in the stable, he said. He gave proofs of his sincerity, no doubt, for Madame Postel was very sweet to him next day. "We may be easy," Eve said to her mother and Marion, whom she found still in a taking, in the latter's phrase. "Oh, they are gone," said Marion, when Eve looked unthinkingly round the room. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Eve and David by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 8. 1 league out of Angouleme, on the main road to Paris, Kolb stopped. "Where shall we go?" "To Marsac," said David. "Since we are on the way already, I will try once more to soften my father's heart." "I would rather mount to der assault of a battery," said Kolb. "Your respected father have no heart whatever." The ex-pressman had no belief in his son. He judged him from the outside point of view, and waited for results. He had no idea, to begin with, that he had plundered David, nor did he make allowance for the very different circumstances under which they had begun life. He said to himself, "I set him up with a printing house just as I found it myself,
and he, knowing 1,000 times more than I did, cannot keep it going." He was mentally incapable of understanding his son. He laid the blame of failure upon him, and even prided himself, as it were, on his superiority to a far greater intellect than his own, with the thought, "I am securing his bread for him." Moralists will never succeed in making us comprehend the full extent of the influence of sentiment upon self-interest, an influence every whit as strong as the action of interest upon our sentiments, for every law of our nature works in two ways, and acts and reacts upon us. David, on his side, understood his father, and in his sublime charity forgave him. Kolb and David reached Marsac at 8 o'clock, and suddenly came in upon the old man as he was finishing his dinner, which, by force of circumstances, came very near bedtime. "I see you because there is no help for it," said old Sechard with a sour smile. "Und how should you and mein master meet? He soars in der skies, and you are always mit your vines. You bay for him, that's what you are a fader for." "Come, Kolb, off with you. Put up the horse at Madame Courtois', so as to save inconvenience here. Fathers are always in the right, remember that." Kolb went off, growling like a chidden dog, obedient but protesting, and David proposed to give his father indisputable proof of his discovery while reserving his secret. He offered to give him an interest in the affair in return for money paid down, a sufficient sum to release him from his present difficulties, with or without a further amount of capital to be employed in developing the invention. "And how are you going to prove to me that you can make good paper that costs nothing out of nothing, eh?" asked the ex-printer, giving his son a glance, vinous, it may be, but keen, inquisitive, and covetous, a look like a flash of lightning from a sodden cloud, for the old bear, faithful to his traditions, never went to bed without a nightcap, consisting of a couple of bottles of excellent old wine, which he tippled down of an evening, to use his own expression. "Nothing simpler," said David. "I have none of the paper about me, for I came here to be out of Doublon's way, and having come so far, I thought I might as well come to you at Marsac as borrow of a money-lender. I have nothing on me but my clothes. Shut me up somewhere on the premises, so that nobody can come in and see me at work, and—" "What, you will not let me see you at your work, then?" asked the old man, with an ugly look at his son. "You have given me to understand plainly, father, that in matters of business there is no question of father and son." "Ah, you distrust the father that gave you life." "No, the other father who took away the means of earning a livelihood." "Each for himself, you are right," said the old man. "Very good, I will put you in the cellar." "I will go down there with Kolb. You must let me have a large pot for my pulp," said David. Then he continued, without noticing the quick look his father gave him, "And you must find artichoke and asparagus stalks for me, and nettles and the reeds that you cut by the stream side, and to-morrow morning I will come out of your cellar with some splendid paper." "If you can do that," hiccuped the bear, "I will let you have, perhaps, I will see, that is, if I can let you have, pshaw, 25,000 francs, on condition, mind, that you make as much for me every year." "Put me to the proof, I am quite willing," cried David. "Kolb, take the horse and go to Mansle. Quick, buy a large hair sieve for me of a cooper, and some glue of the grocer, and come back again as soon as you can." "There, drink," said old Sechard, putting down a bottle of wine, a loaf, and the cold remains of the dinner. "You will need your strength. I will go and look for your bits of green stuff. Green rags you use for your pulp, and a trifle too green, I am afraid." 2 hours later, towards 11 o'clock that night, David and Kolb took up their quarters in a little outhouse against the cellar wall. They found the floor paved with runnel tiles, and all the apparatus used in Angoumois for the manufacture of cognac brandy. "Pans and firewood! Why, it is as good as a factory made on purpose!" cried David. "Very well, good night," said old Sechard. I shall lock you in and let both the dogs loose. Nobody will bring you any paper, I am sure. You show me those sheets tomorrow, and I give you my word I will be your partner, and the business will be straightforward and properly managed." David and Kolb, locked into the distillery, spent nearly 2 hours in macerating the stems, using a couple of logs for mallets. The fire blazed up, the water boiled. About 2 o'clock in the morning, Kolb heard a sound which David was too busy to notice, a kind of deep breath like a suppressed hiccup. Snatching up one of the 2 lighted dips, he looked round the walls, and beheld old Sechard's empurpled countenance filling up a square opening above a door hitherto hidden by a pile of empty casks in the cellar itself. The cunning old man had brought David and Kolb into his underground distillery by the outer door, through which the casks were rolled when full. The inner door had been made so that he could roll his puncheons straight from the cellar into the distillery, instead of taking them round through the yard.
"Aha! This is not fair play. You want to schwindle your son," cried the Alsatian. "Do you know what you do when you drink ein bottle of wine? You give good drink to ein bad scoundrel."
"Oh, father!" cried David. "I came to see if you wanted anything," said old Sechard, half sobered by this time.
"Und it was for the interest what you taken us that you brought der little ladder," commented Kolb, as he pushed the casks aside and flung open the door, and there, in fact, on a short step ladder, the old man stood in his shirt.
"Risking your health," said David. "I think I must be walking in my sleep," said old Sechard, coming down in confusion. "Your want of confidence in your father set me dreaming. I dreamed that you were making a pact with the devil to do impossible things." "Der Teufel," said Kolb, "dot is your own passion for die little goldfinches." "Go back to bed again, father," said David. "Lock us in if you will, but you may save yourself the trouble of coming down again. Kolb will mount guard." At 4 o'clock in the morning David came out of the distillery. He had been careful to leave no sign of his occupation behind him, but he brought out some 30 sheets of paper that left nothing to be desired in fineness, whiteness, toughness, and strength, all of them bearing, by way of watermark, the impress of the uneven hairs of the sieve. The old man took up the samples and put his tongue to them, the lifelong habit of the pressman, who tests papers in this way. He felt it between his thumb and finger, crumpled and creased it, put it through all the trials by which a printer assays the quality of a sample submitted to him, and when it was found wanting in no respect, he still would not allow that he was beaten. "We have yet to know how it takes an impression," he said, to avoid praising his son. "Funny man!" exclaimed Kolb. The old man was cool enough now. He cloaked his feigned hesitation with paternal dignity. "I wish to tell you, in fairness, father, that even now it seems to me that paper costs more than it ought to do. I want to solve the problem of sizing it in the pulping trough. I have just that one improvement to make." "Oh, so you are trying to trick me."
"Well, shall I tell you? I can size the pulp as it is, but so far I cannot do it evenly, and the surface is as rough as a burr."
"Very good. Size your pulp in the trough, and you shall have my money." "Mein master will nefer see de color of your money," declared Kolb.
"Father," he began, "I have never borne you any grudge for making over the business to me at such an exorbitant valuation. I have seen the father through it all. I have said to myself, 'The old man has worked very hard, and he certainly gave me a better bringing up than I had a right to expect. Let him enjoy the fruits of his toil in peace, and in his own way. I even gave up my mother's money to you. I began encumbered with debt, and bore all the burdens that you put upon me without a murmur. Well, harassed for debts that were not of my making, with no bread in the house and my feet held to the flames, I have found out the secret. I have struggled on patiently till my strength is exhausted. It is perhaps your duty to help me, but do not give me a thought. Think of a woman and a little one." David could not keep back the tears at this. "Think of them, and give them help and protection. Kolb and Marion have given me their savings. Will you do less?" he cried at last, seeing that his father was as cold as the impression stone. "And that was not enough for you," said the old man, without the slightest sense of shame. "Why, you would waste the wealth of the Indies. Good night. I am too ignorant to lend a hand in schemes got up on purpose to exploit me. A monkey will never gobble down a bear," alluding to the workshop nicknames. "I am a vine grower, I am not a banker, and what is more, look you, business between father and son never turns out well. Stay and eat your dinner here, you shan't say that you came for nothing." There are some deep-hearted natures that can force their own pain down into inner depths unsuspected by those dearest to them. And with them, when anguish forces its way to the surface and is visible, it is only after a mighty upheaval. David's nature was one of these. Eve had thoroughly understood the noble character of the man. But now that the depths had been stirred, David's father took the wave of anguish that passed over his son's features for a child's trick, an attempt to get round his father, and his bitter grief for mortification over the failure of the attempt. Father and son parted in anger. David and Kolb reached Angouleme on the stroke of midnight. They came back on foot and stealthily, like burglars. Before 1 o'clock in the morning, David was installed in the impenetrable hiding place prepared by his wife in Basine Clerget's house. No one saw him enter it, and the pity that henceforth should shelter David was the most resourceful pity of all, the pity of a work girl. Kolb bragged that day that he had saved his master on horseback and only left him in a carrier's van, well on the way to Limoges. A sufficient provision of raw material had been laid up in Basine's cellar, and Kolb, Marion, Madame Sechard, and her mother had no communication with the house. 2 days after the scene at Marsac, old Sechard came hurrying to Angouleme and his daughter-in-law. Covetousness had brought him. There were 3 clear weeks ahead before the vintage began, and he thought that he would be on the lookout for squalls, to use his own expression. To this end, he took up his quarters in one of the attics which he had reserved by the terms of the lease, wilfully shutting his eyes to the bareness and want that made his son's home desolate. If they owed him rent, they could well afford to keep him. He ate his food from a tinned iron plate, and made no marvel at it. "I began in the same way," he told his daughter-in-law when she apologized for the absence of silver spoons. Marion was obliged to run into debt for necessaries for them all. Kolb was earning a franc for daily wage as a bricklayer's laborer, and at last poor Eve, who, for the sake of her husband and child, had sacrificed her last resources to entertain David's father, saw that she had only 10 francs left. She had hoped to the last to soften the old miser's heart by her affectionate respect and patience and pretty attentions, but old Sechard was obdurate as ever. When she saw him turn the same cold eyes on her, the same look that the Cointets had given her, and Petit Claud and Cerizet, she tried to watch and guess old Sechard's intentions. Trouble thrown away. Old Sechard, never sober, never drunk, was inscrutable. Intoxication is a double veil. If the old man's tipsiness was sometimes real, it was quite often feigned for the purpose of extracting David's secret from his wife. Sometimes he coaxed, sometimes he frightened his daughter-in-law. "I will drink up my property, I will buy an annuity," he would threaten when Eve told him that she knew nothing. The humiliating struggle was wearing her out. She kept silence at last, lest she should show disrespect to her husband's father. "But, father," she said one day when driven to extremity, "there is a very simple way of finding out everything. Pay David's debts. He will come home, and you can settle it between you." "Ha! That is what you want to get out of me, is it?" he cried. "It is as well to know."
But if Séchard had no belief in his son, he had plenty of faith in the Cointets. He went to consult them, and the Cointets dazzled him, of set purpose, telling him that his son's experiments might mean millions of francs. "If David can prove that he has succeeded, I shall not hesitate to go into partnership with him, and reckon his discovery as half the capital," the tall Cointet told him. The suspicious old man learned a good deal over nips of brandy with the workpeople, and something more by questioning Petit Claud and feigning stupidity; and at length he felt convinced that the Cointets were the real movers behind Metivier. They were plotting to ruin Séchard's printing establishment, and to lure him, Séchard, on to pay his son's debts by holding out the discovery as a bait. The old man of the people did not suspect that Petit Claud was in the plot, nor had he any idea of the toils woven to ensnare the great secret. A day came at last when he grew angry and out of patience with the daughter-in-law who would not so much as tell him where David was hiding. He determined to force the laboratory door, for he had discovered that David was wont to make his experiments in the workshop where the rollers were melted down. He came downstairs very early one morning and set to work upon the lock. "Hey, Papa Séchard, what are you doing there?" Marion called out. She had risen at daybreak to go to her paper mill, and now she sprang across to the workshop. "I am in my own house, am I not?" said the old man in some confusion. "Oh, indeed, are you turning thief in your old age? You are not drunk this time either. I shall go straight to the mistress and tell her." "Hold your tongue, Marion," said Séchard, drawing 2 crowns of 6 francs each from his pocket. "There." "I will hold my tongue, but don't you do it again," said Marion, shaking her finger at him, "or all Angouleme shall hear of it." The old man had scarcely gone out, however, when Marion went up to her mistress. "Look, madame," she said, "I have had 12 francs out of your father-in-law, and here they are." "How did you do it?" "What was he wanting to do but to take a look at the master's pots and pans and stuff, to find out the secret, forsooth? I knew quite well that there was nothing in the little place, but I frightened him and talked as if he were setting about robbing his son, and he gave me 12 francs to say nothing about it." Just at that moment Basine came in, radiant and with a letter for her friend, a letter from David, written on magnificent paper, which she handed over when they were alone. "My adored Eve, I am writing to you the first letter on my first sheet of paper made by the new process. I have solved the problem of sizing the pulp in the trough at last. A pound of pulp costs 5 sous, even supposing that the raw material is grown on good soil with special culture. 3 francs worth of sized pulp will make a ream of paper at 12 pounds to the ream. I am quite sure that I can lessen the weight of books by 1/2. The envelope, the letter, and samples enclosed are all manufactured in different ways. I kiss you. You shall have wealth now to add to our happiness. Everything else we had before." "There," said Eve, handing the samples to her father-in-law. "When the vintage is over, let your son have the money, give him a chance to make his fortune, and you shall be repaid 10 times over. He has succeeded at last." Old Séchard hurried at once to the Cointets. Every sample was tested and minutely examined. The prices, from 3 to 10 francs per ream, were noted on each separate slip. Some were sized, others unsized; some were of almost metallic purity, others soft as Japanese paper. In color there was every possible shade of white. If old Séchard and the 2 Cointets had been Jews examining diamonds, their eyes could not have glistened more eagerly. "Your son is on the right track," the fat Cointet said at length. "Very well, pay his debts," returned old Séchard. "By all means, if he will take us into partnership," said the tall Cointet. "You are extortioners!" cried old Séchard. "You have been suing him under Metivier's name, and you mean me to buy you off. That is the long and the short of it. Not such a fool, gentlemen." The brothers looked at one another, but they contrived to hide their surprise at the old miser's shrewdness. "We are not millionaires," said fat Cointet. "We do not discount bills for amusement. We should think ourselves well off if we could pay ready money for our bits of accounts for rags, and we still give bills to our dealer." "The experiment ought to be tried first on a much larger scale," the tall Cointet said coldly. "Sometimes you try a thing with a saucepan and succeed, and fail utterly when you experiment with bulk. You should help your son out of difficulties." "Yes, but when my son is at liberty, would he take me as his partner?" "That is no business of ours," said the fat Cointet. "My good man, do you suppose that when you have paid some 10,000 francs for your son, that there is an end of it? It will cost 2,000 francs to take out a patent, there will be journeys to Paris, and before going to any expense it would be prudent to do as my brother suggests, and make 1,000 reams or so, to try several whole batches to make sure. You see, there is nothing you must be so much on your guard against as an inventor." "I have a liking for bread ready buttered myself," added the tall Cointet. All through that night the old man ruminated over this dilemma. If I pay David's debts, he will be set at liberty, and once set at liberty, he need not share his fortune with me unless he chooses. He knows very well that I cheated him over the first partnership, and he will not care to try a second. So it is to my interest to keep him shut up, the wretched boy." The Cointets knew enough of Sechard senior to see that they should hunt in couples. All three said to themselves, "Experiments must be tried before the discovery can take any practical shape. David Sechard must be set at liberty before those experiments can be made, and David Sechard set at liberty will slip through our fingers." Everybody involved, moreover, had his own little afterthought. Petit Claud, for instance, said, "As soon as I am married, I will slip my neck out of the Cointet's yoke, but till then I shall hold on." The tall Cointet thought, "I would rather have David under lock and key, and then I should be master of the situation." Old Sechard, too, thought, "If I pay my son's debts, he will repay me with a thank you." Eve, hard pressed, for the old man threatened now to turn her out of the house, would neither reveal her husband's hiding place nor even send proposals of a safe conduct. She could not feel sure of finding so safe a refuge a second time. "Set your son at liberty," she told her father-in-law, "and then you shall know everything." The four interested persons sat, as it were, with a banquet spread before them, none of them daring to begin, each one suspicious and watchful of his neighbor. A few days after David went into hiding, Petit Claud went to the mill to see the tall Cointet. "I have done my best," he said. "David has gone into prison of his own accord somewhere or other. He is working out some improvement there in peace. It is no fault of mine if you have not gained your end. Are you going to keep your promise?" "Yes, if we succeed," said the tall Cointet. "Old Sechard was here only a day or two ago. He came to ask us some questions as to paper making. The old miser has got wind of his son's invention; he wants to turn it to his own account, so there is some hope of a partnership. You are with the Father and the Son." "Be the third person in the Trinity and give them up," smiled Petit Claud. "Yes," said Cointet. "When you have David in prison, or bound to us by a deed of partnership, you shall marry Mademoiselle de la Haye." "Is that your ultimatum?" "My sine qua non," said Cointet, "since we are speaking in foreign languages." "Then here is mine in plain language," Petit Claud said dryly. "Ah, let us have it," answered Cointet with some curiosity. "You will present me to-morrow to Madame de Senonches, and do something definite for me. You will keep your word, in short, or I will clear off Sechard's debts myself, sell my practice, and go into partnership with him. I will not be duped. You have spoken out, and I am doing the same.
I have given proof, give me proof of your sincerity. You have all, and I have nothing. If you won't do fairly by me, I know your cards, and I shall play for my own hand." The tall Cointet took his hat and umbrella, his face at the same time taking its Jesuitical expression, and out he went, bidding Petit Claud come with him. "You shall see, my friend, whether I have prepared your way for you," said he. The shrewd paper manufacturer saw his danger at a glance, and saw, too, that with a man like Petit Claud it was better to play above board. Partly to be prepared for contingencies, partly to satisfy his conscience, he had dropped a word or two to the point in the ear of the ex consul general, under the pretext of putting Mademoiselle de la Haye's financial position before that gentleman. "I have the man for Francoise," he had said, "for with 30,000 francs of dough, a girl must not expect too much nowadays." "We will talk it over later on," answered Francis du Hautoy, ex consul general. "Madame de Senonches' position has altered very much since Madame de Bargeton went away. We very likely might marry Francoise to some elderly country gentleman." "She would disgrace herself if you did," Cointet returned in his dry way. "Better marry her to some capable, ambitious young man. You could help him with your influence, and he would make a good position for his wife." "We shall see," said Francis to Hautoy. "Her godmother ought to be consulted first, in any case." When M. de Bargeton died, his wife sold the great house in the Rue du Minage. Madame de Senonches, finding her own house scarcely large enough, persuaded M. de Senonches to buy the Hotel de Bargeton, the cradle of Lucien Chardon's ambitions, the scene of the earliest events in his career. Zephirine de Senonches had it in mind to succeed to Madame de Bargeton. She too would be a kind of queen in Angouleme; she would have a salon, and be a great lady, in short. There was a schism in Angouleme, a strife dating from the late M. de Bargeton's duel with M. de Chandour. Some maintained that Louise de Negrepelisse was blameless, others believed in Stanislas de Chandour's scandals. Madame de Senonches declared for the Bargetons, and began by winning over that faction. Many frequenters of the Hotel de Bargeton had been so accustomed for years to their nightly game of cards in the house that they could not leave it, and Madame de Senonches turned this fact to account. She received every evening, and certainly gained all the ground lost by Amélie de Chandour, who set up for a rival. Francis du Hautoy, living in the inmost circle of nobility in Angouleme, went so far as to think of marrying Francoise to old Monsieur de Séverac, Madame du Boissard having totally failed to capture that gentleman for her daughter. And when Madame de Bargeton reappeared as the prefect's wife, Zephirine's hopes for her dear goddaughter waxed high indeed. The Comtesse du Châtelet, so she argued, would be sure to use her influence for her champion. Boniface Cointet had Angouleme at his fingers' ends. He saw all the difficulties at a glance, and resolved to sweep them out of the way by a bold stroke that only a Tartuffe's brain could invent. The puny lawyer was not a little amused to find his fellow conspirator keeping his word with him. Not a word did Petit Claud utter. He respected the musings of his companion, and they walked the whole way from the paper mill to the Rue du Minage in silence. "Monsieur and Madame are at breakfast." This announcement met the ill-timed visitors on the steps. "Take in our names all the same," said the tall Cointet, and, feeling sure of his position, he followed immediately behind the servant, and introduced his companion to the elaborately affected Zephirine, who was breakfasting in company with Monsieur Francis du Hautoy and Mademoiselle de la Haye. Monsieur de Senonches had gone, as usual, for a day's shooting over Monsieur de Pimentel's land. "Monsieur Petit Claud is the young lawyer of whom I spoke to you, madame. He will go through the trust accounts when your fair ward comes of age."
The ex-diplomatist made a quick scrutiny of Petit Claud, who, for his part, was looking furtively at the fair ward. As for Zephirine, who heard of the matter for the first time, her surprise was so great that she dropped her fork. Mademoiselle de la Haye, a shrewish young woman with an ill-tempered face, a waist that could scarcely be called slender, a thin figure, and colourless fair hair, in spite of a certain little air that she had, was by no means easy to marry. The parentage unknown on her birth certificate was the real bar to her entrance into the sphere where her godmother's affection strove to establish her. Mademoiselle de la Haye, ignorant of her real position, was very hard to please. The richest merchant in L'Houmeau had found no favor in her sight. Cointet saw the sufficiently significant expression of the young lady's face at the sight of the little lawyer, and turning, beheld a precisely similar grimace on Petit Claud's countenance. Madame de Senonches and Francis looked at each other as if in search of an excuse for getting rid of the visitors. All this Cointet saw. He asked M. du Hautoy for the favor of a few minutes' speech with him, and the pair went together into the drawing-room. "Fatherly affection is blinding you, sir," he said bluntly. "You will not find it an easy thing to marry your daughter, and, acting in your interest throughout, I have put you in a position from which you cannot draw back. For I am fond of Francoise; she is my ward. Now, Petit Claud knows everything. His overweening ambition is a guarantee for our dear child's happiness, for, in the first place, Francoise will do as she likes with her husband, and in the second, he wants your influence. You can ask the new prefect for the post of crown attorney for him in the court here. Monsieur Milot is definitely appointed to Nevers. Petit Claud will sell his practice. You will have no difficulty in obtaining a deputy prosecutor's place for him, and it will not be long before he becomes attorney for the crown, president of the court, deputy, what you will." Francis went back to the dining-room and behaved charmingly to his daughter's suitor. He gave Madame de Senonches a look, and brought the scene to a close with an invitation to dine with them on the morrow. Petit Claud must come and discuss the business in hand. He even went downstairs and as far as the corner with the visitors, telling Petit Claud that, after Cointet's recommendation, both he and Madame de Senonches were disposed to approve all that Mademoiselle de la Haye's trustee had arranged for the welfare of that little angel. "Oh!" cried Petit Claud as they came away, "what a plain girl! I have been taken in." "She looks a ladylike girl," returned Cointet. "And besides, if she were a beauty, would they give her to you? My dear fellow, 30,000 francs and the influence of Madame de Senonches and the Comtesse de Chatelet. Many a small landowner would be wonderfully glad of the chance, and all the more so since Monsieur Francis du Hautoy is never likely to marry, and all that he has will go to the girl. Your marriage is as good as settled." "How?" "That is what I am just going to tell you," returned Cointet, and he gave his companion an account of his recent bold stroke. "Monsieur Milot is just about to be appointed attorney for the crown at Nevers, my dear fellow," he continued. "Sell your practice, and in 10 years' time you will be keeper of the seals. You are not the kind of a man to draw back from any service required of you by the court." "Very well," said Petit Claud, his zeal stirred by the prospect of such a career. "Very well. Be in the Place du Murier tomorrow at 4:30. I will see old Sechard in the meantime. We will have a deed of partnership drawn up, and the father and the son shall be bound thereby, and delivered to the third person of the Trinity, Cointet to wit." End of chapter 8.